speed. I just wanted to kind of set the tone for today's meeting. And I don't mean that in any sort of ominous way. I just want to set expectations and hopefully we can stay on track. Mandy has sent out and Gary has sent out a brief agenda. Well, at least it looks brief, but these are pretty complex, pretty layered issues that we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be looking at the energy code and pretty much only the energy code for today's meeting. And as everybody's aware, it is a topic that's important to a lot of people in different ways for different reasons. But what we have to, remind ourselves of, one, the purpose of this body is to build consensus amongst industry professionals and make a recommendation to the department. So always keep that goal in mind as we go through our discussions today, quite frankly, throughout this process. The other piece is that we've given really three options, and I think those are probably, the options that everyone kind of agrees are available, feasible. And just as a reminder, those three options for discussion today are maintaining the current energy standards in what will eventually be the whatever year Kentucky Building Code and Kentucky Residential Code in this updated code, right? And as a reminder, on the residential side, we're working 2009, commercial side 2012. Option two would be the 2018 IECC, and then option three is the 2020. I think everybody kind of has agreed throughout these meetings, especially after some of the presentations that we've seen from a handful of folks, that the 21 it's just not a great option for Kentucky. And remember, that's what we're really looking for here, is what's going to be the best option going forward for Kentucky. And we're factoring in, and not in necessarily in any order of importance, with the exception of number one. Number one is the most important, which is public safety. But cost, the realities associated with construction costs, energy costs, and then other impacts as well. So let's try to keep on track, keep it cordial. I really do. I've said it a million times. I'll say it a million more. I appreciate everybody's time and effort that they put into this. It's a lot of work. We still got a lot of work remaining. Think that everybody's done a really thorough job and looking forward to really just observing, because at the end of the day, at this point, that's all I'm doing right now is observing. So I'll turn it over to Gary and Mandy and everyone else. So thank you all again. And I apologize. My watch keeps buzzing. I need to silence that.
All right. Thanks, Max. So I think what we'll try to do is give each of the task force members an opportunity to speak on what their recommendation is. Given that we're mixed again on our task force. So Eric, I'm going to pick on you first. I know you had submitted a letter as far as AIA's recommendation. I think Mandy tried to share some of these recommendations with the task force members, but if you would, I'll start you off. And I think yours was just reflective of commercial.
Correct.
So the KBC, IBC recommendation, we'll try to alternate. Maybe we'll go home builders next and give them an opportunity, but if you will kick us off with AIA's recommendation.
Sure. So the way that AIA Kentucky approached the commercial code was, it's one thing, particularly with the R values on insulation, that typically is in the architect's hands. But a lot of what's in the new energy code is going to be affecting our mechanical, electrical engineers more than anything else. So we reached out to a number of different firms that are doing different work in different sort of markets. Particularly an engineering firm that is doing work, and this is mostly public school work, in a jurisdiction that is using the 2024 IECC already. And kind of wanted to get their input. And there's some things that are going to, really affect what we do going to the 2024. It's a big jump from where we are now to go to the 2024. what we heard from the engineers were, yeah, there's a learning curve, but there's a learning curve anytime that we do a code update. For the firm that's working, on the East Coast using this new code, they're like, look, once we got past the learning curve, it really is not that big of a deal for us. And that's because a lot of the commercial clients are actually wanting the energy efficiency just to lower operating costs that the code would, force us to move the baseline to. So, as I went through and I'm going to take off my AIA hat and put on my hat. We're already exceeding the R values in our wall assemblies that the new code would require. Now, we're not on the roof and we're not below graded, but we're already exceeding what is in here for any of the work that we're doing for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, for the universities, for the regional universities, KCTCS, and so on. So, great. There are some things, though, that they give us pause, and I put this in the recommendation letter that we made that I think we need to talk about.
Sure.
The first one is that that we're using right now in C401.2 has a compliance path that says that if you can get your total building performance to a certain threshold, a bunch of the specific requirements are off the table. And that has been removed from the 2024. And so there's less design flexibility for all of us doing commercial work than there is in the current code. We can overcome it. I just think it's important to recognize that they are taking away some options that have been used a lot on current building design to get to a high performance building. They're taking some pathways off the table. Okay. The second one is, and I think this is one where we very much would propose a Kentucky amendment. And that is on plug control, so that the 2024 requires that half of the convenience outlets and offices and conference room automatically be de-energized according to a schedule. And we have heard stories on this. People plugging their computer into the wrong outlet, going home at the end of the day with a file open, coming in the next morning, their outlet is de-energized, their computer's locked up, they've lost their work from the previous day. The worst scenarios that we have heard has been where they have implemented this beyond what the code is requiring into things like classrooms, laboratories, that sort of thing. And with a lot of devices that are smart, even though you may not be using them overnight, if they're plugged into an outlet that's de-energized, you lose your preference settings. And so you've got to come in the next day and you've got to reset preferences on that smart device before you can get your workday started. And so that's one where I think a Kentucky amendment might be warranted until users are more accustomed to thinking that way. And they are on the commercial side with emergency outlets, red outlets in hospitals and that sort of thing. But this idea that I can't tell the difference between an outlet that's going to have power 24 hours a day and an outlet that's going to have power 12 hours a day, we're just not there yet. And I see that being a real hassle. That probably dominated the conversation that we had with our engineers was please don't mandate flow control right out of the gate. The next one, the third one was that the 2024 is requiring renewable energy for all buildings over 5,000 square feet. Most of the work that is happening right now in sort of medium to large commercial has some sort of solar component to it. But what's happening right now is that the solar component is typically sized to maximize your rebate on the Inflation Reduction Act and not beyond that, which on the buildings that I design, that typically is about half the roof area. So, there's a lot more roof that we could use for solar production. But with our utility companies not being prepared to buy excess power back, I think that this requirement is going to create a problem with utility companies. I don't feel like our utility infrastructure is prepared for this mandate, is kind of the concern there. From a design standpoint, it's not that big of a deal. From an owner standpoint, most commercial owners now are asking, large commercial owners are asking for solar ready buildings anyway, even if they don't want to do solar now. So having the additional roof structure to support the solar installation, have the pathways and that sort of thing, and the switchgear ready to go, that's become pretty common in my world. So from a design standpoint, this isn't that big of a deal, but I don't think our utility companies are ready for this. The fourth one is, and this is minor in the grand scheme of things. ComCheck does not yet have a version that is capable of demonstrating compliance with the 2024. And so we've got a software gap. I figure in a year that'll probably be fixed. But right now, I don't know what software we would use to demonstrate compliance. And so you're going to run the gamut of really complicated calculations being submitted that I'm not capable of understanding, and I suspect most of the plan reviewers are not going to be either. Or people are just going to not comply. And like I said, I figure in a year, probably this will be solved, but right now, we don't have the software tools to easily demonstrate compliance. So those are the four I think are worthy of consideration and discussion. The fifth one there is just most of the comments that we had among the various architects, among the architects and the engineers, was really this idea that a lot of this stuff is going to make our buildings that much more complicated. And owners are constantly frustrated with how complicated these building systems are with, UK doesn't need guys walking around with a wrench anymore. They need people walking around with laptops. You fix your building with a laptop, not with a wrench. And these maintenance personnel, male and female, are much more expensive to employ. You can't really check their work in a way that we're used to checking their work. And, this new code is going to make buildings that much more complicated. And that's kind of where we are. So we're recommending to go to the 2024 on the commercial side. But there's a 6-month learning curve on this.
So Eric, then if I misunderstand correctly, but safe to say, recommend the 2024 on the commercial side, but with some amendments and possibly some delayed enforcement on some of the criteria.
That's
safe
like a
to
very
say?
sensible approach. I think, most of the feedback we got was along the lines of, I'm going to have to change how I do this. I'm going to have to change how I do this. And, to a certain extent, it's like, well, okay. And that's what we always have to do. Everything is always changing. All right. Crimea River. But these were the ones that it's like, I don't know how we make this work is kind of where we landed on these first four.
So, and Eric, I think, if I remember correctly, when we met back in February at General Butler, did you express some concerns about as far as mechanical equipment and its availability?
Yeah, I did. And enough time has elapsed that we're not hearing that that's a problem. The other big concern that I had heard early on was that there was going to be no way that owners that are operating off of a central utility plant would be able to meet the new performance requirements. And I'm hearing that that is not really proven to be that big of a deal.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're exactly right here. So those were two of the things I brought up.
Max, you
Yeah.
question?
And you may know the answer to this, probably, and you may not, I guess a very specific question, but for item 3, does the code prescribe a certain percentage or amount?
Yeah, and I can't answer that specifically, but in the general sense, it's always based on a percentage. So the larger the building will, the percentage isn't necessarily going to change, but the scale of it definitely grows with the size of the building. I think one of the things that we talked about is, it's 5,000 square feet the right number? And I could see a justification for that number being increased. So that, we're really drawing a line in the sand and saying, it's like, look, if you're doing a major manufacturing facility, if you're doing a major academic building, a major healthcare, this is something that you ought to be doing. And again, our last, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, our last 9 or 10 projects in a row have had rooftop solar. Even down to community libraries, they want that free power. Is what they're looking for. But you think about a developer doing a commercial, a retail development, a strip mall. Okay, is a strip mall developer going to want to deal with transfer switches and they're not seeing that return on investment the way that a building owner is, because they're passing those utility costs on to the tenant. Those tenants are looking for low rent. Those tenants aren't looking for energy. And so we talked quite a bit about, is that 5,000 square foot the right number? I'm not convinced of it, but it's based on the percentage.
Eric, can you be more specific on number 5? Is most of that electrical, mechanical? I mean, when you're talking about the
Yeah.
complexity of, is it electrical?
It's a little bit of both. So, let me find an example.
So the building envelope is not necessary.
Right now, the building envelope is not the weak link. And so one of the big changes that's happened in terms of building envelope design over the last 10 years or so is where we're putting insulation relative to where does the dew point occur relative to our weather barrier. And the architects are all moving the dew point to the exterior side of our weather barrier. And so, and one of the things I like about the 2024 is that they're now giving us 3 options on how to deal with that exterior wall R value. What we're doing right now is this R13 option with less continuous insulation on the outside, but we're actually putting more continuous insulation on the outside to shift the dew point outside the stud cavity. What I love about this new version is that it allows you to have R0 in the stud cavity and put all of your insulation outside, which is what we would probably then move to do. And I think most of the firms that we compete with would do the same thing. That's about risk management. I don't want the dew point on the interior side of the weather envelope, because then I've got the potential for mold growth inside the stud cavity, rust at the bottom of the studs, all that sort of bad stuff. So envelope is not the issue. Our major curtain wall manufacturers are improving their thermal performance. We're going to start seeing triple glazing in Kentucky on some big commercial buildings. Right now, we're just doing double glazing with argon. We're going to start seeing some triple glazing showing up, mainly for acoustics more than thermal performance. And we're doing a project at UK right now that's got some triple glazing on it just for acoustics. We're up against the railroad tracks. So I'm going to go through a couple of specific comments here from one of our engineers. So C403.3.4.1 boiler oxygen concentration controls. This engineer talks to a boiler tech, said this requirement will cause unneeded complexity and cause nuisance issues. And it's a worry about the reliability of those sensors. And we've all seen that. Sensors fail. And so some of these new code requirements are going to require sensors in places that there haven't been sensors previously. That's more sensors that can fail. It's going to make troubleshooting harder. The first cost is not the issue. It's the reliability of the design system that is the concern to the engineers. It's that kind of stuff. Can it be overcome? Sure. Is it going to require the engineer, the design team, to educate the client on how to operate the building? Yeah. Is it going to cause more callbacks during the first year of operation? Yeah.
These are things that are beyond the package.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are some electrical ones, the plug load control, that's the electrical one that everybody just really is gun shy about.
Yeah.
But most of the comments we got from the engineers, it's on the HVAC side.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Eric?
So Eric, I do have one comment.
Okay.
So you all are proposing the 2024 with some issues. And I guess my question is this still better in your all's opinion than the 2018?
So one thing I can say for sure is that everyone hates the 2021.
Right.
Everybody hates the 2021. And we heard that loud and clear from the engineers. Please, for the love of God, don't consider stepping back to the 2021. I think if we look at the big commercial picture, the 2018 is going to be more palatable than the 2024 if we look at all commercial construction. If we look at sort of medium to heavy commercial construction, the owners are demanding the 2024 level or higher already. So, the impact on a UK, on a Commonwealth of Kentucky project, I don't know that it's going to make that much of a difference between 18 and 24. To get back to those commercial developers, 18 would be more palatable than 24.
Why do they want the 24?
They want a building that is consuming less energy. It's all about reducing energy consumption.
Okay.
And you take someone like a major healthcare system, they'll trade first cost for lower utility bills all day long. Because
So
they
it
want a
might-
50-year building.
It's money in their pocket on the back end.
Listen, I haven't had a single conversation with a single client in the last 5 to 8 years that's about climate change. I have no interest in having a conversation with any of our clients about climate change, trying to do a good thing for the planet. This is about money. This is about, everybody cares about money. And these big commercial clients, they want to save money. And they'll spend more up front to save it every day that building is in use.
Eric, I got one question for you that may put you a little bit on the spot, but I'm trying to brainstorm and figure out. So with the smaller commercial buildings, the churches and the small mercantile and stuff like that,
Right.
would there be any potential amendments that we could make that might help balance the scale for the smaller commercial projects and still use the 24?
I think so. I think it would take some really careful consideration on some of this stuff. And one of the engineers we talked to is on the call, and he's texting me right now with some comments on this. And that's how it's going to play out. I'm not knowledgeable enough on any of these review comments from these engineers to say, well, here's the one that we really need to talk about. We would have to sort of go through. I got pages and pages of comments from engineers. We would have to go through these and say, this is a big deal. This is not a big deal. Here's one that really would affect your light commercial work. Here's one that would not. And I don't know. We have not gone far enough with our evaluation really to be able to answer that question, Gary. Because there's no doubt that the word commercial covers too broad of a range to just sort of say what works for a Baptist Health, what works for a UK ought to be the rules that applies to everybody that's doing commercial construction. And particularly when you start thinking about, like I said, the strip mall example, it's like, that's chances are that property owner does not have a full-time building tech that's just walking around taking care of things. They're going to have someone on call, and that's how that building functions. And so the more complicated we make it, the harder it is to keep that building operational. And there's always going to be a point where an idealized system that is saving that property owner money and reducing demand on our electrical grid, blah, 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 all the good things. But if it's not working, then the inefficiency of a non-functional system could easily outweigh the benefits of a functional system. And that needs to be part of our thinking about this.
Anybody else with any questions or comments for Eric?
That was a non-answer, Gary. That's the best I can do.
No, I was just, in my mind, I'm wondering, hey, if we were to make amendments to make it fit, the whole scale of commercial, would we wind up with so many holes poked in it that we say, well,
Correct.
we're better off using the 18 than the 24?
Correct.
Okay.
And certainly AIA's position on every code is always going to be, we need to use it off the shelf as much as we can and mess around with the police.
Yeah.
And if 2018 with very few amendments, I would choose that over 2024 with lots.
Okay. All right. So Eric, Dan, I'm gonna put you guys on the spot. Can you all?
I don't know what that means. It can't be
It
good.
can't be good. I'll write coattails a little bit. along the same, I saw a lot of heads shake too. Relates most is that strip center for me. Like when we talk about these big guys and what they want to do for energy, makes sense to do as energy efficient as we can. But I saw a lot of head shake when he said, well, we want to keep in mind that that guy who's building for a tenant, they want the cheapest rent they can get. And so that's kind of, I feel like maybe the nut that we have to crack in the residential code here is that we're not talking about billionaire industries. We're talking about folks who the upfront costs do matter, maybe the most to. We did a survey and probably 70% of the responses were we want to stay right where we are. And it's yes, partly because we continue to be, and that's what my granddad did, kind of industry. And that's how Kentucky builders think and operate. And we hate change. Yes, there's that. But more importantly, we are already in a big struggle and fight with the affordability of the home for anybody as it is. And so spending money to conserve energy is just not, we don't think, on the forefront of potential consumer mind. It's, I just want to afford a dang house. I want it to be nice, but I really don't care inside of the walls or even at that. So we can save $50 a month on a utility bill, but not if we can't afford the house in the first place. And so our constituents have very much voiced an opinion that the status quo, I saw a lot of the old timers, if you will, that have been through this process are, Max, I've heard you mention this, like after 2009, we just, the diminishing returns there for the residential side. What are they? I know I've sat and talked to Andy, excuse me, I forgot your name, but and said, we'd be willing to go the same, like go to 24, but the more we sit and talk, it's going to end up like that, right? Like the token is we're going to go 2024, but then we're going to ask to shoot this thing so many shotgun shells and make so many amendments that we're really hoping to show the outside world that we went to 24 simply to try and take it back as close as we can get it to the 2009. So I don't want to be confrontational to get to 24, but the R value, Eric and I had a conversation, the R values and energy adjustments that happen, like there's some real focal points on where are we losing energy in a house, and an R48 attic and an R13 wall are not really where the heat loss, energy loss happens.
Yeah, Eric and I, it's like on the commercial side, we do thermography on all of our buildings, and it's like when it's not the field of wall or the field of roof that is the weak link in our building envelopes. It's a can light in a building soffit, and it's a bright red circle every time that we do thermography on a building. It's like we need the manufacturers of can lights to come up with a well insulated can light house.
Or a big hole through the exterior of the house in order to bring fresh air in. And there's a big energy loss. So, I don't know that we're prepared to say what version we've been back and forth. Yes, I love the idea of having some means and measures to offer our builders a new way to start approaching building. And to maybe go through I think we had this discussion in Google, and I think the underlying theme is that some point down the road, we're going to be building houses more on a performance base, such as commercial seems to already be grabbing hold of, than the prescriptive side, right? Like it would be so much better if we had imaginative builders trying to figure out how to get to these ratings, which I think is how 24 is written. I don't know that I know our members would prefer to stay where we are. I don't know if that's feasible at all. I kind of have my doubts about that, but the first thing we start smashing in 24 is our values, is insulation stuff. And so if we're going to take that back to what is currently an acceptable level, are we really going all the way to 24 to make those kinds of amendments? And that's really, I think, the only way I get any support from the builder side is if our amendments don't let us have to do +5, +10 insulation on the outside, that we don't have to do increased insulation values in attics, that we can stay 2x4 walls. And then at that point, what have we done in between? So I
don't have any.
I made a couple notes here that too, it's like in the commercial world and then these big, they want to take an energy first approach. They want to save all the energy they can do. But in a more consumer and not in a more consumer based situation with home building, it is way, I mean, I don't have, but way more important is what is the upfront cost, not what is the potential savings. At least when we look around in the current market that our folks exist in, our median first-time home buyer age has gone through the roof. We're helping our kids buy houses. We're having 25-year-old college graduates come back home and live with parents because they can't afford houses. Doesn't matter what the utility bill is. They can't afford the new entry-level $400,000 house. And so, I'm only complicating our conversation, I know, because we kind of thought 24 and then we'll amend it. Then when I listened again today to hear him say, because we've had the conversation in the house, saying we'll go to 24 is just a token statement for us because we're not ready to do some of the hard things that the 24 really come out with, or we would desire not to. We're going to say they're not ready. I mean, anything happens.
Did you all by any chance talk about any other additions? Like does the 18, is it palatable or they?
Much more, kind of exactly, much more so than maybe the 24 because we don't have some other. And no, I did not study that. I'm not in the know as much about that.
So we talked with our energy rater and we looked at it through the lens of, and maybe before I say this, I'll just reiterate kind of what Eric's alluded to a little bit and some of what Eric's talked about already is, I mean, we obviously have a housing shortage in this country and in the state of Kentucky, and then we absolutely have a housing affordability challenge in the state of Kentucky. And I feel like the path of jumping essentially 5 code cycles from the 2009 to 2024 without amending it isn't going to be palatable. You know, the impact that's going to have on home sale prices is going to be significant. We did meet with our energy rater to talk about compliance with both the 2018 IECC and the 2024 IECC. And we talked through it. We talked about it through the lens of if we adopted one of these codes, what kind of amendments would we want to advocate for to at least mitigate some of that cost impact? And just going back to a question you asked previously, Gary, to Eric, is we go to 2024. There's definitely going to be more amendments that we would push really strongly for. Than the 2018. I think the 2018, we get there a lot closer with fewer amendments. I think there's probably a couple of key ones that we really want to have in 2024, even just like section R408, additional efficiency requirements under the 2024 IECC, we would want to strike that completely. There's those additional requirements on top of the code compliance is going to add a lot of costs on residential rooms and R2 and R3 occupancies. So
what is that section?
additional efficiency requirements, so R408. So it gives a whole list of additional 10 additional credits you need to earn by providing additional efficiency requirements
Okay.
above and beyond what's prescriptive.
Okay.
I've been looking for this comment too for, I don't know this individual, I'm not going to mention the name. Hope not to offend any of our officials in the room, but this is also some concern, I think, for the energy industry. And I heard some similar, the energy code, energy rater that been used. This is just their comment. Typically, I would recommend moving all the way to the 2024 IACC, but with other issues at play in Kentucky, I believe that it would be a bit of a stretch for this to actually work. Being that I'm an energy rater and directly tied to the IACC, code, the biggest issue that I see is that code officials don't understand or enforce the existing energy code. So in the Louisville market and surrounding area, that's a huge issue. Louisville Metro, Bullitt County, Spencer County don't enforce any of the current energy code. So it lies only on our energy raters themselves. Oldham County partially enforces it, while Shelbyville and Shelby County are the only code enforcement agencies that do a good job of enforcing the code. Oh no, this means that not only are the building inspecting officers not knowledgeable of the current energy code, they aren't building to the standards of that code 16 years ago. They audit hundreds of homes per year. Most glaring issues are blatant code violations that should have been caught prior to this. Most of the houses are less than a couple years old. Can only imagine. And it goes on.
That was some of the comments I got from engineers.
Yeah. Like the 2000, oh, here's where I was trying to get from. 2018 provides an updated energy code without making such a huge leap. It also puts Kentucky on par with the states that surround it. Don't believe there are any states that have adopted the 24, and I don't think Kentucky should be one of the first. So, as much as anything, I think energy raters and how that relates to the inspectors, because I would reiterate that too, that my local inspectors I don't care much about the insulation side of it when we're doing framing and roughing and up until recently in the county, there was not, they want to do a framing inspection before you insulate, then you insulate and finish and then do a final. There's nobody looking at the energy and the rating of that as codes officials. And so, that plays in some.
Go ahead.
Max?
Well, I've been waiting. And I apologize. I'm gonna start the policy with everybody, I hope, because, and it's not that these discussions at this point aren't worthwhile. But my concern, and I don't know if anybody else is hearing this, but what I continue to hear is we should do this instead of that, but we shouldn't do this. But we're not getting to any why, we're not getting to any sort of detail. And I hate to say it this way, but these details matter, right? So, during the presentations, I worked with the National Association of Home Builders, presentation from Ashray. One of the things that came up is that in 24 is, I guess, fundamentally different from some of these previous codes. There are a number of options that are given to the design professionals, the builder, to the owner, to kind of make a decision. And it's my understanding, and this could be I could be completely opposite, right? My understanding, the 21's not like that, the 18's not like that, the 15's not like that, 9, 12, none of those were really like that. The 24 was kind of a paradigm shift in the approach to code compliance on the energy side. And I think it was one that was well received by folks. I know the code making process was a little bit different for the 24. And that's kind of how it ended up where it was. When I hear from a pure cost perspective, your biggest jumps are the 9 to 12. And then the 12 to 15 doesn't really do much. 12 to 15 to 18 doesn't really much in terms of, it's raw cost, right? That's great. But it's still a big jump, right? So in my mind, and this is just purely Max personally, I'm hearing the 8 it might be okay, it might be palatable, but I'm not hearing a why. When my understanding, just again, and this is somebody, I've not cracked an energy code book, to be completely honest with you. It'll happen when it comes time to make a decision. And that's not right. I would, but I don't understand it the same way with an engineer or even, a HVAC. But what I've heard is so often, this is great because of the choices that are offered. We don't like the big jump from the 9 to 12 to the 9 to whatever, basically the 9 to anything at this point. But I'm not hearing the why in 24 versus, developing, I guess, kind of 24 versus 18 discussion. And the why is very important. Are there specific things in the 18 that make it a better approach than the 24? Are there specific things in the 24 and the 18 that make it a better option? I think those are the sorts of discussions that we ought to be having, because I think everybody in here can kind of anticipate one another's general statements, right? I mean, at this point, we've worked together for quite some time. And I can regurgitate them. If I can regurgitate them, that means we got to have a little more in-depth discussion, because I'm not in like anyone else in this. Not that what we're doing right now isn't productive, but I do think there needs to be a much more nuanced discussion about some of those specifics. And if we're not ready to have that discussion right this second, I understand that it's not a simple code by any means, and everybody else has jobs. So I get that. But I would, if we can, I would really like to see us focus on some of these specifics and some of the.
I think the paradigm shift and the whole builders starting to build on a not prescriptive, but performance based, sorry, performance based, I think makes sense moving forward, right? So do that for us. So for us, the cost, I guess, from like 9 to 18, it looks like about, we're trying to do math with some broken numbers because we don't have, but about $12,000 to $15,000, and then from 18, we wanted to draw it back down to 24. So it's only like another $5,000 in the cost for 15. So we probably take care of most of that difference in the 18 to 24 cost if we can amend some R values, and it's a lot of R values, right? And
Well, I think it's
related
stuff.
specifically 2x4 walls. That's a big one for all of us when we talk, because it's not just what's the stud cost, it's the 69/16 jams on windows, it's the extra material required when you're trimming your doors, it's the extra material required when you're trimming windows, it's the, a lot of those type things.
Well, I think it's that, and I think also section 408, that is, as I mentioned, that's not in the 2018 IACP. And that's specifically earning those additional 10 credits is going to significantly have a significant cost impact on the home. So you're already compliant, then you have to earn these additional credits. So specifically, and I'm not an energy expert, I rely more on conversations with our energy grader on identifying some of these, but I think you're right. I think I don't know if we're fully prepared to discuss the specific amendments in here today, or at least I don't think I am, but I think, you know, what I would like to see, if we make a decision on what code to go with, I think what I would like to see some level of understanding or agreement that, the idea of adopting amendments to the code is a palatable.
Yes.
That people are open to that, especially as I think of it, as it relates to the residential code and residential lots.
It was with our NAH, actually, in the private NAP, Google Meet, like with that. So our amendment become something that allows speaking up all that. So we can start, I'm gonna use that. And so we still agree, let's do some work on that and improve that. That will help. And that means the new whole house and intake stuff. But 408, perhaps instead of 10 points and how many measures, we can reduce that to one measure of 7.
We're getting 7.
But in some of that, I think, yes, we're deleting section, but I also think if we dive into that, some of that's gonna have to be done in order to meet some of that.
Yeah, so this is only required on performance pathways. So with performance, trade-offs for not being prescriptive, so you look at your own value. But the trade-off would be to select something with equivalent points. But when you look at what gives you the most points, most people are doing it anyway. Like where your ducks are placed, are they inside of the monopoly? Are they outside what percentage, percentage outside what type of water heating device do you have? And so some of the homes that we're already seeing built, if they did performance, which most of the production builders we see do that. I mean, if I look at this chart, they're already meeting this requirement for where they're placing their ductwork and what type of water heating system.
So we start feeling a little like, you said, production got more. That's what we do now in New Orleans. We didn't have a single production builder in Hardin County, and so nobody's doing it.
I say production because they're the ones that are building the more affordable housing in our area.
So none of us, we all restricted too, so it's the biggest step for the small builder and his son building houses. That's where the biggest challenge is going to be.
That's was based on the performance option, those small.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Which really boils down
It's
to,
it's enforceable across the board. But you can still opt for the prescriptive as an option.
it's an education challenge, which we've had on the commercial side as well, where it's like, you know, getting people to understand, well, I'm gonna have to change my method, but how things get built may not change that much. And that basically is the conversation here, is how we approach what are we gonna build has to change. And you know, that was, you know, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago on the commercial side, where we really started to engage in performance-based as opposed to prescriptive. Almost everything that the architects are doing in the commercial is all performance-based, which means you've got to do 2 energy models. You've got to do an early design phase energy model, and then you've got to do an in the CDE phase, compliance model. It's like, that's a huge thing. I mean, you're talking $40,000 worth of engineering time to do those 2 performance models. That's a big deal. But in the end, you know, the changes to how we are putting buildings together, that needle has not moved as much as we've got to change the way we get there has moved.
Yeah, so the hesitation becomes not $3,000, but it's $1,000 in the residential world of this builder to decide, okay, I want to take what gives me some options in the easy way out with performance.
Right.
But it means I've got to spend $1,000 to relate to somebody, and I don't understand. I don't understand it in the first place.
Yeah, that's why education
is the most important. So if we can find cycle and simplify, or even make it just a little easier to do those measures. At the pace, I don't know if it takes one, they could help with that very quickly, because we're gonna have that lower test, you know, industry there too.
So I don't know, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know that's something that I think everybody, or at least everybody that I've spoken, has been worried. Because I think if you go from the 90-12
To anything.
it's coming.
And we've been told, and I'm taking, and it's gonna be a hard fight to get out of, so this kind of thing it come to an understanding that we're gonna get lower tests from every house we go in Kentucky from this state. I mean, and so there's our give, but we want to take everything else.
Can I present some whys on the commercial side?
Yeah,
Because I do think there are a lot of whys that are driving AIA's position in this stuff. And I think one of the reasons why maybe that's not what we tend to start with, and certainly I have not done that, is that, you know, the philosophy behind it sometimes falls on deaf ears. But there's a series of sort of positions that we take that are all about the why. And they run from the practical to the very philosophical. And the practical side, the further behind we get, the harder it is to catch up. And so AIA wants to stay as current as we can with all of the codes across the board, just to lessen that pain when we do catch up. And if we're on every 6-year cycle or whatever, well, that's better than every 9-year cycle and every 12-year cycle or whatever. So we're wanting to stay as current as we can to lessen that pain and the impact on our clients and everybody in the design community and find to make those adjustments. I think our point of view, the worst thing you can do is to stay where we are now, because we've just made that teaser date and you have to catch up that much more pain. So that's one wrong. Second why for us is that right now, with a new code adoption, with a new version of the code out, there are resources available far beyond the commentary that, or the significant changes books that ICC puts out. There will be continuing ed sessions at conferences that we can go to, where we can be educated on, here's how you're gonna have to change your methodology. Here's what it means in practical terms. Let's look past the code language and let's talk about it in practical terms. That information, those learning resources only exist for a period of time. And if we don't, catch up to the code until 6 years later, nobody's offering those training sessions anymore. So it makes it easier. The learning curve is easier if we're participating in that new update. So that's a second sort of practical one. On the more philosophical side, as architects, when we look at the percentage of energy consumption sort of worldwide that is related to buildings, and we look at the economic and social and healthcare costs of energy consumption and energy production, as architects, we ought to be doing everything in our power to reduce energy consumption. Most of the energy that is produced worldwide is still produced with methods that produce pollution. Pollution affects public health. Public health affects the cost of healthcare. We're all living that by what we pay for healthcare and what we pay for health insurance. We've got a less polluted world with less health impacts from that. We all benefit from that in many ways, economically, health-wise, all of those things. From an energy consumption standpoint, with what buildings, consume, as architects, as engineers, we should be doing everything in our power to reduce energy consumption because it is placing demands on our current energy production infrastructure, which is not up to the rate of expansion of energy consumption. And that means that we need new power plants, new transmission lines, all of this sort of stuff. And again, that affects us. Those are economic resources that are going to energy production as opposed to other things, more affordable housing. The cost of a new coal burning power plant, a new nuclear power plant, a new offshore wind power plant. All of these things are very, very expensive. And we should be doing everything that we can to reduce the new demand on our electrical, our energy production infrastructure. Those are some of those whys. And it's like, so, AIA would like to go to the most current code we can for all of those philosophical reasons, for all of those practical reasons. But we also recognize that it has to be balanced with all of these other forces. And like I said, it is very hard for most architects, with most clients, to sit down and say, we think that it's on your shoulders to do the right thing to benefit all of society. That's a hard sell. Can we sell this is going to save you on your utility bills? Yeah, we can sell that. That's not the real why. The real why is this is the right thing that we should all be doing. And, set aside the political debate on climate change. Just look at it in terms of impact on health, impact on energy production and energy consumption. It's the right thing to do. That's the one. And I'll get off my soapbox. It's just hard to sell that.
So one thing let me just say this. Thank you all for participating. Because these are the sorts of things, I don't know if Gary or Mandy are written to us. So this is, I think it is productive and these are necessary conversations. And so we're talking about, I'm fixating on this. The 24 versus the 18. I'm trying to recall back to the presentations that we had the last winter, somewhere around there.
December.
Yeah. And, I remember, and you all correct me if I'm wrong, the payback period, no matter who you looked at it from, was, I guess, it was more cost effective to go, let me rephrase it one more time. It was more cost effective. The energy efficiency gain from the 15 to 18, 12 to 18 wasn't that high, right? But from the 18 to the 21, it was pretty high, but there was a pretty substantial cost associated with it. From the 21 to the 24, the efficiency gain was, it was higher for less money. And so I know this is I'm phrasing this really poorly. Where if the next topic, so to speak, where's the best value just in terms of dollars? Is it with the 18? Is it with the 24? Are we paying $5,000 to get a 50% increase in efficiency when we could pay $6,000 to get a 70% increase in efficiency? I don't know how that would ratio out, but I think one might be a slightly better. I think that might be something worth discussing as well. I certainly don't have the answer to any of that. And I'm actually going to step out for a second.
So here, what's the timeline for making this decision? Are we wanting to get this decision finalized before the end of June? Do I understand that correctly?
So that would be nice, but what I will say ultimately, we want to make the right decision. And if that means going beyond June, then that means going beyond June.
I think that to Mr. Fuller's point, I don't know how the commercial side would be able to say, here's your return on investment time period in a broad brush. But I think one of the things that we could do is we could go back to some of our members and say, look, let's have 4 of us take a project you're currently working on. And let's do the energy model based on current code. Let's do the energy model based on the 18 code. Let's do the energy model based on the 24 code. And let's look at what the real world implications are. And I'm willing to bet if we had at least a month, maybe 2 months, that we could probably get some members to do that out of their, I mean, that's work. I think we could probably find someone that would do it out of their own pocket to sort of say, here's what this looks like here in real world example, project on the boards. Here's what this would mean.
That's the only way that I see us really knowing the answer to that, but not just from the commercial standpoint, but also the residential standpoint. Flipping gears to the other side, in the 24, I remember from our classes that we had about the energy 24, I remember them saying that you could still use a exterior 2x4 wall. You're just going to have some trade-offs. So you wouldn't be using the prescriptive method. You'd be using one of the other 2 options in the residential section. So I think if we looked at those 2 methods to see, well, where are we really? This is the cost. Which one's better as far as energy proficient?
That's the builders who can't get work done now to stop and figure out the process they've never done before. I just don't know how much maybe Dan can offer something better. And I just looking around builders in my area, or the folks in some of the other markets I deal with, I just don't see that we're going to get much support on this is what it would actually cost in this house for saying, you ask, unless you run that model for the 10 different options, say which one of those actually makes the most sense. I mean, we're talking a ton of work for, again, small guys that have 2 employees, 5 employees, and I just don't know how much.
Well,
Ray, never had that kind of experience yet? Anything on the 24?
I think we can do something similar. I think we can take our own currently that we're building. It would be specific to our building practices. Every building goes a little bit differently, but we could have our energy rater look at it from the current 2009 compliance, 2018 compliance, and 2024 compliance.
Yeah.
And then you could,
We're here to tell you.
identify what the differences are and then assign a cost. I think we could do that. I do think that would be a,
I mean, what I would really hate to do is jump on the 18 when we didn't do this exercise, and then we come to find out later, years later, that it probably would have been better if we went to the 24. And
That has
I'm-
always been our thought, right? Is that how as the task force are we gonna look if we stop at the 18 and we don't get this thing done until 27 and there's a new one and we're right back to being 9 years behind the curve again? Like, is that really where we, as a task force, is that the legacy we want to leave behind? Is that where we still find Kentucky 9 years behind the energy curve?
I think the other big why, which is, going beyond, AI Kentucky's small role in this, is this idea of how do we overcome inertia? Inertia is going to maintain the status quo. How do you make positive change in society? And there's a role for entities, whether that is government or some other entity, to overcome that inertia. And I feel on the energy consumption side that we need someone to overcome that inertia to stay where we are, for all the benefits that I've already said. And I think this is a case where we need state government in Kentucky to pull to overcome that inertia, because all Kentuckians are going to benefit in multiple ways from a more energy efficient infrastructure, a more energy efficient built environment.
Resilient.
And resilient, yeah, I haven't even said resilience. I mean, we're all of the information that comes my way about building design in our zone, this in-between zone between cold climate and hot. Everything I am seeing is saying we're going to see more volatile weather in this in-between zone than we have seen historically. I think we already can kind of see that with more severe thunderstorms, more tornadoes, more flooding. And it's like, the more resilient our buildings are, the less damage they take. We've all seen that in Florida with hurricane resistant construction. I went to college at the University of Kansas, how they build for tornadoes in wood frame residential in Kansas. Taking wind damage in Kansas than we do. Well, that affects health, and that affects affects all of our property insurance, our homeowners insurance premiums, all that sort of thing. So yeah, resilience is another one. But it's hard. It's hard because, like I said, you're looking at a specific project, a specific client, and saying, you need to spend some of your money to make Kentucky a safer, healthier, better place to live. Those are hard conversations to have.
And much different, the commercial plan than residential.
It is, but I mean, even the clients that I work for, there's always a point at which they're like, so what do I get out of this? What do I get out of this money you're telling me that I need to spend? And I think humans have a tendency to be fairly selfish most of the time, because you're trying to take care of yourself. What we all do. So, like I said, these are hard conversations to have. And, on a large commercial project, the numbers we're talking about can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. That this is not pocket change. It's not walking around like we're talking about. We're talking about lots of money.
So Joe did it all figured out.
You left.
I figured I was holding on. Just real quick, and I apologize. Laura Lynn, she passed out menus to you all. I don't know if you noticed, there is a cafeteria here at the transportation cabinet. You're not obligated to eat there. However, I think one thing we might need to figure out, I think Laura Lynn was saying that the cafeteria staff, if there's a majority of folks that want to utilize that, they're kind of saying, get in there early, get in there 11:30. I think originally we said 12. So there's another topic for discussion.
All right, so we got any other discussion as far as Eric, Dan on the home builder side? So it sounds like, it looks like, Max, we're probably headed toward some more in-depth research from the member organizations and us, and coming back to the table with some real proposals.
I do have one that's counterintuitive to what my constituents or what our survey says to us, in that it's maybe wholly, not solely, but wholly my opinion here, is that I like the direction and idea of having much more of a performance-based option. I think it's the new way for home builders to build houses, to get away from, here's how you gotta do it, right? Let us use some imagination to do that. So I like that idea. To that point, 24 is the only one that offers that option with any significance. And so I just wonder if our stance maybe should be 24, but here's where our energy rater says we need to make the most changes in order for it to mean the most, but keep that, just what you said. I hate to go back to 18 and lose that performance option. I sincerely do, but I think that performance option, some of the newer, younger, we've been in a push now trying to get younger folks involved in our industry, that give me some other options so I don't have to do it like my dad did, has a real interest in today's younger builders in that market. And so let them use their imagination and some ingenuity when building. And so I just wonder if our exercise, instead of even the 18, is just simply, okay, 24. But here are the things our energy raters will help make them act them up, help save the most money, but still we've moved in the right direction for some energy efficiency. I'm only making the water muddier and muddier, I feel like. But at the same time, we don't want to take that off the table, do we? I mean, I don't really want to see us take, personally, I don't. I see some ideas in there, I'm thinking, I want to do that. I'm going to be different than the old, and I'm becoming one of those. No, don't look at Craig. Than the much older builders in our industry. And so I can set myself apart that way, right? Like I'm doing these things. So I don't know that I want to go to 18 and lose that ability. I don't know that.
I can say, our experience on the commercial side is that the shift from prescriptive to performance has resulted in better buildings. And I don't just mean in terms of energy efficiency, I mean better buildings that are doing what the client expects that building to do more. One of the biggest challenges on the prescriptive side, even under the current code, is you can't have more than 40% glass and use a prescriptive model. It's like these universities, they all want these big all glass atriums, whatever. The only way to do it is performance based. And so it's like, yeah, you can give the client the building that they want, but we're having to dial up these other things to offset having that much glass. That results in better buildings. And, most of the time the client can't necessarily see that. They don't know what the other option could have been that we didn't design for them. But we can see it, our engineers can see it. This is a better building.
But as Max said, the reason we see that 24 is more efficient, but less costly, is because the thing we have to determine with our values went from some absurd numbers that had zero effect on your energy efficiency in a house, back to something that makes a little more sense. And so to continue down that, back a few of those ranging down, because how many air changes in the house, per hour, and it's the view factors and
Glazing matter a lot.
numbers, they need to get better, but maybe we don't have to go all the way. And I don't know what the industry is doing. Maybe we have a hard time finding windows that are halfway in between.
We're going to see things like frit patterns starting to show up in residential construction. We've been doing that on the south and west side of buildings for a long time. In commercial buildings, it's going to start showing that you've got different glass on the south and west sides of the house than you do on the north and east. Don't way different.
I don't want to. I don't know. I just don't want to see us waste time on the 18, but I think for us, it's either all or nothing. When I read comments from everybody, even up to 70%, it was want to stay where we are. Well, if we can't stay where we are and you have to choose, that was one of our questions. Nobody said 18. I mean, none of our folks said they just don't want any change, or yes, let's go to 24 and then amend it. 2018, we find ourselves as a task force 9 years behind the curve on this.
Yeah, that's
Approximately.
everything. Too, yeah.
You know, there's gonna be a 27 coming out the month after we release, then we go to the 18.
Yes.
You know, Max, what I hear, it doesn't matter what energy code we pick. If we stayed where we are, we've got training that needs to be done because we've got inspectors not inspecting correctly. And we likely have some contractors not building energy efficient. And if we go to the 24, we gotta train, everybody's gotta be retrained on how we approach that, from plan review to design to construction to inspection side of it. So that doesn't really, it's not earmarked to a specific energy code, but I do want to throw that out there. We've got an education component, whatever we do. That's going to take some time, and we went through that when we did the 12 and 9. We just got some more work to do. Do you all want to stop there? It's 20 after 11 for anybody who may want to take advantage of the cafeteria here. Amy, we have time? I don't want to rush you. I was coming to you all next, but you want to break for lunch and come back?
Well, the only thing that we also have in Mexico.
Oh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we can leave it too.
We'll be back from lunch.
Yeah, we'll be back. Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and break. We'll be back at 12:30. And Amy will put you guys up in the hot seat.
Did you?